this winter, my 6-year-old daughter broke my heart. She was taking snow from the outside, taking it into the house, and sticking it into containers. And I asked her, "What are you doing with all the snow?" She said, "I'm putting it in the freezer. This summer I'm going to mail it to the Arctic so the polar bears don't die." My son broke my heart too. It's her twin brother. He has a very unique perspective on what is cute. You know, to most people, like, cute is babies and, you know, little furry animals and stuff. But to him, cute is nautiluses and cuttlefish and sea slugs and manta rays and manatees. If it lives in the ocean, it's cute. So one day we're watching an IMAX movie about the ocean. And they get to that part in the movie where they're talking about, of course, the ocean is under threat. About a minute later, he's tugging on my arm. And I figure he has to go to the bathroom. But then I look at his face. He says, "Daddy, we have to leave. Now." I'm like, "Why? What's wrong?" "We have to go pick up garbage and save the oceans." Now, their older sister, she knows that there's problems on the horizon. Right? Just a year or two ago, her world was still filled with fairies and magic and the good guys always win. But now she's in grade 4, and she's starting to learn about the reality of the problems of the world. And she asks me earnestly, what can she do? And that's the big question, isn't it? What can we do? Well, here's what I don't tell her in response to how do we fix the problems of the world. I don't tell her to reduce, reuse, recycle. Turn off the lights, take shorter showers, eat local and organic food. Don't tell her these things. Now, don't get me wrong, these things are important, and we do these things because they're important. They're part of building a sustainable society. But they are not the answer to the question of how do we save the world. Let me ask you a question. How many of you in the audience here have ever tried to undertake a behavior change for yourself? You've tried to change a habit, like exercising, eating better, getting more sleep, something like that. You've tried to change that, and you have failed. How many people? Yeah. Everybody, right? Everybody. Private lifestyle behaviors are not the solution because, first of all, it's not going to happen fast enough, right? It's not realistic to expect the millions of us to change our behaviors. I've been a believer in the environmental mantra my whole life, which is change your behaviors, reduce your ecological footprint, right? And if you get concerned that it's, one person's actions don't really matter, then you console yourself with, well, if everybody does this. But it's unrealistic to expect that millions of us are going to change our behaviors really fast, right? Because we can't even do these things. We can't even do the things that we are motivated to do for our own benefit, right? The things we're highly motivated to do. It's much less likely we can get people to do things that they're not that motivated to do. Like try to get your obstinate uncle, or perhaps your mayor, to eat less bacon. Or to take public transit instead of driving. It's not going to happen. Right? And besides, expecting most of us to change our lifestyles when we are embedded in a system that normalizes and rewards ever-increasing consumption is highly unlikely. Now, sometimes drastic life events can be a wake-up call. Right? I hope this never happens to you, but imagine the day when your doctor tells you you've got cancer. What are you going to do? Are you going to say, "No, I don't. What do doctors know anyways? It's probably just a medical conspiracy." Right? Are you going to say, "Oh, no, cancer is too expensive. Right? I'm just going to ignore this and wait for someone else to invent a cure"? Are you going to ask them, what is the maximum length of time in which I can wait and do nothing before this will finally spiral out of control? No. Right? You're going to feel awful. You're probably going to reel in shock. And then you're going to face reality. And you're going to want to know, how bad is it? How long do I have? What do I do? And what are my chances? So how bad is it? It's bad. Right? It's bad. We know that the climate is changing. It's changing and everything is changing along with it. The tiny, tiny minority of people who deny this are dupes and shills of the industries that are creating it. Right? And you guys know this. Even recent surveys in the United States show that about 93% of Americans are no longer on board with the climate change deniers. The remaining 7%, well, they're very vocal and they're very well funded, but we massively outnumber them. And the signs are everywhere, right? From the changing seasons to the US drought, from Hurricane Sandy to the fact that last year, Australia added 2 colors to its weather charts, right? To account for temperatures it didn't have to talk about before. Temperatures that they're expecting to get up into 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Last year, 2012, the United States spent more money on climate-related weather disasters than it spent on education or on transportation. It was almost $100 billion in federal money. What most people don't realize yet, though, is that we are right now, this very decade, we are on the brink of a tipping point, tipping the climate into much greater degrees of warming. We didn't know this until a couple of years ago. I've been following climate change science since the mid-1980s when I wrote a student paper on it. We're learning a lot of things. It's changing really fast. For one thing, we used to expect that some of the really bad stuff was far in the future. We used to expect that it would be, up to a century maybe before we would see an ice-free Arctic in the summer. Now we're talking about the next couple of years. 2015, maybe this summer. We used to think that we would get worried when we found evidence that the Arctic was starting to melt and thaw and release massive amounts of methane into the atmosphere. Right? This was a concern of civilization-ending proportions, because methane is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. But this was far in the future. Except now we realize it's already happening. Right? There's vast plumes of methane, as have been published in the last couple of years, surging up from the ocean above Russia and through Siberian lakes. Hundreds of these things. Some of them are more than a kilometer wide. We used to worry that eventually the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would start acidifying the oceans, making them more acid, and that would be bad. And it turns out, of course, that is also already happening. Right? We are turning the oceans more acidic. And we're doing this faster than the oceans have acidified in the last, get this, in the last 300 million years. 300 million years ago, humans were fish. As the oceans acidify, the entire oceanic food chain collapses. And I will be honest with you, I have sat in a room and wept when I've thought about the fact that my son may never see his ocean creatures, these things he loves so much. He may never see them except on films of how things used to be. To my son, his ocean is going to be a graveyard. This is why the people who really know what's going on, eminent scientists like Dr. James Hansen, are leaving their labs and becoming activists. Dr. James Hansen is now willing to get himself arrested to bring attention to the fact that every mountaintop that is blown up for coal and every pipeline that's built for oil is a nail in our collective coffin. This is why eminent scientists at eminent universities like Stanford are publishing articles asking, is civilization collapsing? And concluding, probably, unless we do something to change our course really, really fast. Now, this is negative stuff. This is terrifying. A lot of people don't talk about these things because they are afraid that they will make people feel hopeless. But we do have hope. There is still time. Even Dr. Hansen thinks so. Right? We actually have all the solutions and all of the technology we need. We just need to use them. So how long do we have? Not very long. Far less time than we recently that we realized until recently. We don't have much time before the positive feedback processes in the climate start ramping up to the point that climate change is more than we can handle. We can't leave this for future generations. Right? By the time a baby that's born today won't be in kindergarten before our action window has potentially slammed shut. And this is not the conclusion of radical environmentalists. This comes straight from the International Energy Agency. Hardly a bunch of tree huggers. They give us 4 more years before we've locked in enough carbon-intensive energy infrastructure to make it virtually impossible for us to scale things back quickly enough. So 4 more years is 1 more election cycle in Canada and the United States. So what can you do? Well, we need to restart the heart of democracy. Right? We need politicians who are empowered by the people, not by corporate lobbyists. The only way we can do this is to make the public's voice louder than the voice of the corporations. Imagine if 90% of us went to the polls. Imagine if 90% of the youth went to the polls. Imagine if between elections, 90% of us stayed involved and held our politicians' feet to the fire. But how do we do this? Well, I believe there's a solution, and it's not far off, because we do it all the time. Right? We do it all the time. This is an age-old solution. We've just never ramped it up to the scale of the problems that we face. It starts with breaking through our resistance to talking politics with people. It starts with getting past the outdated notion that climate change, that caring about climate change depends on your political leanings. Because the climate doesn't care if you're liberal or conservative, NDP or Green, doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat. It affects us all equally. And the solution starts with creating a new social norm in our own friendship networks that says that political activism, not apathy, is cool. Right? In the 1990s, the slogan was, "Friends don't let friends drink and drive." Right? And that got us all thinking a little differently about the responsibility that we have to our friends. Well, now it's friends get friends involved in changing the world. So the project that we are launching with our friends and with our kids is called the Unstoppable Snowball. It's very simple. Join, and then talk to your friends. And that's the critical part. It's actually talking to your friends, right? Have a conversation. Tell them how important it is to you, and then ask them explicitly for help. Ask them to make a commitment to you. Not an enormous commitment. Ask them to commit 15 minutes a month. Because what we're going to do is post the highest impact actions that people can take every month. Right? Based on the politics that are going on in our communities, in our cities, in our regions, in our countries, what can you do each month that would potentially make a difference? And if people do this in their friendship networks, they'll support each other and take action. Now, for sure, if you go start talking to your friends and family, they're not all going to want to get involved. Right? There's going to be some naysayers. There's going to be people resistant to the idea. That's okay. Don't get overly, focused on that. Focus on the fact that there will be some early adopters in your friendship networks. Right? Bring them on board. Now you've got a group. And that group of you can convince many of the rest of them to get on board too. Right? And now you have a social movement snowballing in your own social network. So why do I believe this is going to work? I believe it's going to work because it brings together three things that we've never successfully brought together before, so far as I know, in an international movement. It's easy. It's personal. And it's focused on the behavior change that truly matters, which is behaviors that change the system, not that change lifestyles. And this is also going to work because we live in a networked world. Right? We live in a networked world. So if you're wondering, why try something? Is it just going to fail? Well, I don't agree with that. Right? We live in a world of 6 degrees of separation, or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Every year in my environmental psychology class, we do a little exercise. There's about 50 students and I, and we think about how well connected we are. And it's amazing what happens. Because we can name anybody, any politician, Obama, Harper, even the Queen. And it turns out that amongst the 50 of us, we're only a couple of friendships. We're rarely more than 3 friendships away from those people. My partner and I were talking about this yesterday. And it turns out that she has 2 links directly to President Obama, mediated by just a couple of personal relationships. Right? Our social networks overlap. Think about your Facebook communities. Our social networks overlap and are vast. Right? They cover the entire society. Even presidents and prime ministers and CEOs have kids and husbands and wives and friends and neighbors. And we're only a couple friendship links away from those people. Right? So I believe in the next election, the next elections, we're going to bring out the vote. And we're going to keep up the pressure afterwards. We can change the system because we are the system. The people are still more powerful than the corporations if we start using our collective voice. So what are our chances? I'm going to give you 2 answers to this. The first answer is, I think our chances are awesome. I do. Because we live in a time of revolution. There are people's movements rising all over the place, all over the world, in Canada, the US, Europe, the Middle East, everywhere. Right? There's tons of organizations springing up all over the place taking action on these issues. So you don't have to join the Unstoppable Snowball. I'd like you to. Join whatever you want to join. Join whatever organization you believe in. But get involved in the kinds of action that will make system change, like so many people are working for. And I really want to emphasize that. As one example, 350.org, which is a fantastic organization, delivered, in conjunction with some other organizations, delivered over 1 million comments to President Obama protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. 1 million comments. Right? People are rising. The second answer I have for you, what are our chances, is that it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter what our chances are. Right? Because really, this is our only home. We have to try. When your house is on fire, you either fight the fire or you escape the house. We cannot escape this house. We have to fight the fire. And inside this house, the earth, is everything that we love. Right? This is what's finally sinking in. The climate change is not about the climate. It's not about the environment. It's about everything you love. Thank you.